The bullet entered just below his left shoulder blade. That's what the surgeon said, matter of fact, like he was reading a grocery list. The damage to your spinal column is significant. We were able to stabilize you, but recovery will be a long road. Mr. Sun, you may not regain full mobility. Sun Mun-hee, the man whose name made loan sharks sweat and rival bosses lose sleep, sat in that hospital bed and watched. Watched as Phoebe Shane's face moved through its emotions like a woman flipping channels, searching for something worth caring about. What does that mean, exactly? She didn't ask about pain, didn't ask about prognosis, didn't reach for his hand. What does long road mean? We have the charity gala in 3 weeks. The Lot Hotel already confirmed the reservation. 3 weeks. He had been shot less than 48 hours ago, and she was already consulting a social calendar. She didn't cry, didn't whisper "I love you" against his knuckles. She stood at the foot of his bed with her phone half raised, expression caught somewhere between inconvenienced and calculating, like a contractor who just discovered the renovation was going to run over budget. She looked at him like he was a property in a declining neighborhood. But what Phoebe did not know, what no one in that sterile white room knew, was that Sun Mun-hee had already moved his toes twice while the surgeon was talking. This was not a tragedy. This was a trap, and she was already walking straight into it. But there was someone else in that building, someone no one was paying attention to. A quiet woman in a dark uniform who had followed the ambulance to the hospital on her own time, waited in a plastic chair for 6 hours without being asked, and was now standing at the edge of the doorway holding a thermos of barley tea because she remembered he didn't like the taste of the hospital coffee. Nobody was watching her. They should have been. But before we get to what happened next, I need something from you. If you've ever watched someone show their true face the moment the money looked uncertain, if you've ever been the only one in the room who actually showed up, hit subscribe. Because this story, it's going to make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, and it's only getting started. Now, let me take you back to where this really began. 6 months before the assassination attempt, Sun Mun-hee had everything a man in his world could accumulate. Or so the ledger said. At 42 years old, Mun-hee ran the Heon Syndicate, a criminal architecture so precisely constructed that 3 separate government task forces had tried to dismantle it and walked away with nothing but filing fees. His penthouse sat on the 63rd floor of a tower in Gangnam, all steel and glass, and the kind of silence that costs money to maintain. His name didn't appear in newspapers. That was by design. The men whose names appeared in newspapers ended up in courtrooms. Mun-hee's name appeared on offshore accounts and in the nightmares of people who owed him debts. He had started with nothing worth cataloging, grown up in a 2-room apartment in Mapo, son of a man who pressed shirts in a dry-cleaning shop and a mother who kept the books and never complained about either. They were not poor in the way that breaks children. They were poor in the way that teaches them to count, everyone, every favor, every slight. By 14, Mun-hee was running numbers for a local crew. By 19, he had reorganized the crew's entire operation and quietly removed the man at the top. Not with violence, with patience, with paperwork. By 30, the Heon Syndicate existed. By 42, it was a nation-state without a flag. But somewhere in the architecture of power, he had spent 2 decades building, something had quietly hollowed out. A room in the structure he hadn't designed and couldn't locate. He had lieutenants who feared him and lawyers who protected him, and a doctor on retainer who asked no questions. What he did not have was a single person who would sit with him through a fever. And then came Phoebe Shane. She walked into a private art auction in Itaewon, one of those events that exists not to sell art, but to allow certain kinds of people to find each other without the inconvenience of being seen in public. 28 years old, posture like architecture, a dress that looked like it had been designed specifically to end conversations and start negotiations. You have the look of a man who already owns the painting he wants, she had said, appearing at his left shoulder without introduction. He had almost smiled. Almost, does that trouble you? Not at all. She had tilted her glass toward the canvas in question, a brutal abstract in black and red. Trouble me if you buy it and hide it. Art like this deserves to be looked at. He bought the painting. He put her number in his phone. Within a month, she was attending functions with him. Within 3 months, she had moved a wardrobe's worth of designer clothing into his penthouse. Within 5 months, he had begun, for the first time in adult memory, to lower his guard. Not completely, not foolishly, but enough. A man like Sun Mun-hee lowering his guard even a fraction was geological in its significance. She's different, he told his chief lieutenant, a man named Baek Ryu. She doesn't ask questions she shouldn't ask. Baek Ryu had said nothing. Mun-hee had noted the silence and filed it away. He should have listened to the silence. Because the questions she wasn't asking out loud, she was asking elsewhere. It started with small things. Phoebe on the balcony at 2 a.m, phone pressed to her ear, voice dropping to nothing the moment she heard his footsteps. Just my stylist. You know how she gets about the upcoming season. Phoebe requesting that her name be added to a secondary account. For emergencies, Mun-hee. What if something happened and I needed to handle arrangements? I wouldn't even know where to begin. Logical, on the surface. The kind of reasonable that sounds right until you turn it over and look at the underside. Then came the evening that reordered everything. Mun-hee had returned from a meeting in Busan a full day before schedule. The driver had barely pulled into the tower's private garage when Mun-hee stepped out alone, told him to go home, and rode the private elevator up in silence. The penthouse appeared empty. Most of the staff had been dismissed for the night. He heard Phoebe's voice from the study. The door was angled open 3 inches. She was on a video call, feet tucked beneath her on his leather chair, wine glass on the side table that had been a gift from a Japanese associate and was not meant to be used as a coaster. 3 more months, that's all I need. The voice on the other end, a woman, high and bright. Are you serious? You've actually done it. You're going to go through with it. The man is worth more than most governments. Do you understand what that means after a marriage of even 1 year? Even 6 months if the paperwork is structured correctly. But you'd have to actually live with him. Phoebe's laugh was a sound Mun-hee had never heard from her before. Light, careless, completely unguarded. It was, he realized with cold clarity, her real laugh. Everything else he had heard was a performance. I already live with him. I smile at the right people and I stay out of his way. It's the easiest job I've ever had. The man is so starved for something that looks like warmth, he doesn't even notice that the warmth isn't real. He just needs the shape of it. Mun-hee stood in the hallway. The shape of it. He was silent for a long time. Then he walked back to the elevator, rode it down, and sat in the back of his car in the dark underground garage for 40 minutes. Not with anger, with something worse. With the recognition that his mother, dead 8 years now, had looked at women like Phoebe Shane her entire life and understood them on sight, and he had spent 42 years building a machine for seeing through people, and had still managed to miss this one entirely. Because he had wanted to miss it. He went back upstairs. He kissed Phoebe on the cheek. He told her he'd had a productive meeting. And he began to think about traps. They say money talks. In this penthouse, it screamed, and I had been too busy listening to her voice to hear what the money was saying. 2 weeks later, the assassination attempt happened. A convoy ambush on a private road outside Seoul. 3 cars destroyed. 2 bodyguards dead. Sun Mun-hee, extracted from the wreckage with a wound that looked worse than it was, made a decision in the back of the ambulance before they even reached the hospital. He would not tell anyone he could move his legs. Not his doctor, the private one, the loyal one, sworn to the kind of silence that is maintained with financial incentive and mutual risk. He would tell him the truth. Everyone else would see only what Mun-hee wanted them to see, a broken man. A broken man is either buried or robbed. He needed to know which one Phoebe was planning. He already suspected. And the answer, when it came in full, the ledger of her cruelty laid out across the weeks of his supposed paralysis, would be more comprehensive than even he had anticipated. It wasn't the wheelchair that paralyzed me. It was the look in her eyes when she realized the chair might be permanent. Relief. She couldn't hide it fast enough. But there was a second thing he had not anticipated, a variable he had not built into the model. Her name was Vanessa Edmond. She had been on staff for 11 weeks. Quiet, precise. She appeared in rooms only to make them functional and disappeared again without requiring acknowledgement. Munhee had barely registered her existence before the wheelchair. After the wheelchair, she was the only person in the penthouse whose behavior did not change at all. Not a degree, not a shade. She still knocked twice before entering, still left his morning tea at exactly the temperature he preferred, still asked, without performance, whether there was anything he needed, and accepted no as a complete answer without requiring him to justify it. Everyone else in the building had subtly shifted. Lieutenant spoke louder, more slowly, as if the wheelchair had affected his hearing. Phoebe had begun addressing staff about his care in the third person while he sat 3 feet away. Even Beek Ryu, the most controlled man Munhee had ever employed, had developed a particular quality of pause before answering questions, as if recalibrating each time whether the answer was owed to the boss or to the situation the boss was now in. Only Vanessa moved through the space the same way she always had. The king had been dethroned, and she was the only one in the court still bowing to the man rather than the crown. Sun Munhee noticed this. He filed it, and in the deep, cold architecture of his mind, the same mind that had built an empire on the ability to read what people revealed when they thought no one was watching, something small and entirely foreign began to take shape. He didn't have a name for it yet. He would later. But first, there were rats to map and a throne to reclaim. And a woman in a maid's uniform who knew more than she was showing. The quiet ones always see the most. I was about to find out exactly how much she had seen. The spill happened at 8:43 in the morning. Munhee knew the exact time because he had been watching the clock on the study wall, a habit he had developed in the chair, this precise cataloging of moments, the way a man inventories a room he suspects he'll need to describe later. He had been reviewing documents, financial summaries his accountant had forwarded, numbers that told a story he was only beginning to read the full shape of. Then the sound, glass meeting marble, the particular register of something expensive becoming something broken. It had come from the main hall. One of the younger staff, a girl, maybe 20, who had started 3 months ago and still moved through the penthouse with the careful terror of someone who understood that accidents here had a different cost than accidents elsewhere, had clipped a side table with her cart. A crystal tumbler. Gone. He heard it, did not move, waited. Phoebe appeared at the top of the stairs 40 seconds later, already dressed, already armored. She assessed the situation from the landing with the efficiency of a woman who had learned to identify inconveniences from a safe distance. The girl was already crouching, apology pouring out of her in a rapid, breathless stream directed at no one in particular, at the floor, at the air above the floor. Phoebe descended 3 steps, looked at the mess, looked at the girl. Said nothing. Stepped to the left. Walked around the perimeter of the spilled glass, not quickly, not with irritation, but with the casual, absolute indifference of a person navigating street furniture, and continued toward the front entrance without breaking stride. The door sealed behind her. The girl remained crouched over the broken glass, the apology still running its engine somewhere inside her, even though there was no one left to receive it. She saw a broken man. The other saw a broken opportunity. And in between those two visions, a 20-year-old girl knelt on marble and apologized to an empty room. Vanessa came from the east corridor 2 minutes later with a dustpan and cloth before anyone had called for her. Munhee watched from the study doorway. He had wheeled himself to the threshold without conscious decision, the same instinct that made him walk toward a problem rather than away from it. She didn't speak to the girl with the clipped urgency of someone performing efficiency. She knelt beside her, said something low. The girl's shoulders dropped, not from relief exactly, but from the sudden absence of the tension she had been holding since the glass hit the floor. She handed Vanessa the largest shard and stood and walked back toward the kitchen, and the particular way she walked, spine lengthening, pace steadying, said more about what Vanessa had said to her than any transcript could. Vanessa swept the fragments in a single clean arc, stood, looked up. Found him watching. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Miss Shane walked through, he said, not a question. She had an early appointment, Vanessa said, the same unloaded tone, a weather report. He looked at her. She met his eyes with the direct, unperformed quality he had noticed in the first days home, not boldness, not challenge. Simply the steadiness of someone who had decided a long time ago that looking away solved nothing. "What did you say to her?" he asked. "The girl." A brief pause. "I told her the tumbler was already chipped, that it was going to go eventually." "Was it?" Vanessa picked up the dustpan. "Does it matter?" The quiet ones always see the most, and the sharpest ones know when the truth is less important than the person hearing it. He said nothing, wheeled back into the study. The assessment, he had come to understand, was running in both directions. He was watching Phoebe, mapping her movements, her calls, her small and telling rearrangements of his world while he sat in the chair and appeared to be simply enduring. That was the visible architecture, the trap he had built. What he had not fully anticipated was that someone else had already been conducting an assessment of their own. Quieter, without agenda, without even, he suspected, full awareness that she was doing it. He began to notice the things Vanessa noticed. She noticed, for example, that he reviewed documents in the morning and that the desk lamp in the study threw a shadow across the left side of his reading surface. She replaced the bulb with a different temperature without comment. He discovered this when the shadow wasn't there one afternoon. She noticed that the physical therapist his doctor had arranged came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that after those sessions he endured with the rigid, contained expression of a man who was performing limited mobility while feeling entirely capable of standing up and walking the man to the door. He was quieter than usual. Not pained, just compressed. She did not try to fill the silence on those afternoons. She simply made sure there was tea, and that no one came to him with logistics for at least an hour. He had not told her any of this. She had simply watched and drawn conclusions, and the conclusions were accurate. He thought about that. A woman who read situations the way he read people, who built an accurate model of a person from behavioral data, and then acted on the model without needing the person to confirm it. He had spent 20 years surrounding himself with people who anticipated his needs out of fear. This was something architecturally different. It had no fear in it, and the absence of fear in his experience meant one of two things. The person had nothing to lose, or the person had already decided that honesty was less dangerous than performance. He was beginning to think it was the second. On the 5th day, Phoebe came to him in the afternoon. She had the manner of someone who had prepared for a conversation, the way a lawyer prepares for cross-examination, knowing the general direction of what they wanted to extract, but ready to reroute if the terrain shifted. She sat across from him, crossed her legs, set her phone face down on the cushion beside her, which was a gesture designed to signal full attention, and therefore immediately communicated that full attention was being performed. "We need to talk about the next few months," she said. "We do. The doctors haven't given a clear timeline, which means we can't plan, and not planning creates," she paused, searching for a word that didn't sound like what it was, uncertainty. Uncertainty for whom? She recrossed her legs. "For both of us, for the household. There are decisions that normally go through you, and now there's a gap. The decisions are still going through me." "I know that." Quickly, too quickly. "I just mean logistically. There are things I could handle if you gave me the appropriate access. It would actually take the pressure off you while you focus on recovery." Yes, a small, satisfied compression of the lips. He had given her the word she needed. "Exactly, while you focus on recovery." He looked at her, the precise architecture of her, the way she had arranged the conversation so that every path through it led, by slightly different routes, to the same destination, access. 3 weeks ago, he would have given it to her. Not because he trusted her. He had never fully trusted anyone, But because he had wanted, with a specific and embarrassing want, to believe that the warmth she showed him was real enough to build something on. Not love, necessarily. He had stopped expecting love from the category of person he had become, but functional loyalty. The kind that holds because mutual interest holds it. He understood now that her interest and his had never been mutual. Hers had simply been patient. Money doesn't talk, it waits, and she had been waiting with the discipline of a woman who had done the arithmetic before she walked in the door. "I'll consider it," he said. She smiled, stood, picked up her phone, unlocked, a message waiting. She read it in a glance and the smile adjusted by a fraction of a degree. "I'll let you rest." She moved toward the door. "Phoebe." She turned. "The Quan dinner, the one you rescheduled." A pause, recalibration. "What about it?" "Reschedule it again. I'll attend." Something moved across her face in the quarter second before she contained it. Surprise, yes. But underneath the surprise, a structural concern. The look of someone whose plan requires a controlled environment and has just been told the environment is changing. "You don't have to push yourself, if you're not." "I'll attend," he said again. Same tone, same weight. She left. He sat with the quiet. She needed me in this chair, not because she cared about my recovery, because a man in a chair is a man whose diary is manageable. He was still in the study an hour later when Vanessa came to collect the tea tray. She moved through the room without drawing his attention toward her, the particular skill of domestic work done correctly, present without being intrusive, functional without becoming furniture. He was looking at the document in his lap, but not reading it. "She'll push back on the Quan dinner," he said, not to anyone specifically. The room, himself. The pattern of thinking out loud that he had, without noticing, begun to allow in her presence. Vanessa paused with the tray. "Probably." "You heard." "The walls in this penthouse are very effective at carrying sound," she said. "I don't always choose to hear what they carry." He looked at her directly. "But sometimes you do." She did not answer that, set the tray down rather than picking it up, stood with her hands at her sides. "She asked me this morning," Vanessa said, "how often the physiotherapist visits, what the schedule looks like, whether his notes are kept on file here or sent directly to the hospital." The room was very quiet. "She asked about the notes," he said. "She wanted to know what they documented, whether progress was recorded, whether absence of progress would be—" a slight hesitation, notable. He put the document down. A woman who was planning to love him through his recovery did not ask about the documentation of his non-progress. A woman who was building a case asked that. He had suspected. Now he had the shape of it, traced by someone who had no investment in telling him and had told him anyway. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Vanessa picked up the tray, moved toward the door, stopped at the threshold. "Because someone should," she said. And left. She saw a broken man. The other saw a broken opportunity. And between those two pairs of eyes, I understood for the first time which one of them was actually dangerous. She left at 11 in the morning with 2 of his cards. Not 1, 2. The distinction mattered. One card was the kind of spending that could be explained, maintenance, appearance, the ongoing operational cost of being Phoebe Shane in the specific social tier she occupied. 2 cards was architecture. 2 cards was a woman who had done a calculation and decided that the answer was larger than 1 card could hold. He watched her go from the study window. The car service he had not called, the overnight bag he was not supposed to notice. Both registered, both filed. He turned back to his desk. The first transaction came through at 11:47. He had set up the alerts 3 days ago, not through his usual financial team, through a separate channel, a number he had used once before under circumstances that had also involved someone spending his money with more confidence than the relationship warranted. The alert arrived as a text. No name attached to the number, just figures. 4,200,000. A boutique in Cheongdam-dong he recognized as the kind of establishment that did not display prices, because the clientele it was designed for considered the question beneath them. He set the phone face down, picked it up again at 12:31 when the second alert came. 1-9-800-000. Jewelry. A name he knew from the kind of occasions where the gift is also a message, where what is purchased communicates something about the person doing the purchasing, about how they see themselves, about what they believe they are worth, and who they believe is obligated to fund that estimation. He put the phone down again. New diamonds for a funeral I wasn't dead enough for yet. By 3 in the afternoon, he had stopped reading the alerts individually and was simply letting them accumulate the way rain accumulates. Each drop unremarkable, the volume eventually undeniable. 112-400-000, a fashion house. 13100-000, a hotel spa day rate, which meant she was not coming back for dinner. 16700-000, a restaurant, lunch for more than one person based on the figure. He did not know who she was lunching with. He had suspicions that had the particular quality of suspicions already becoming certainties, a geological process, slow and irreversible. The penthouse was quiet around him in a way that felt structural rather than incidental. The kind of quiet that exists not because sound is absent, but because the sounds present are insufficient. A building with 30 staff and one occupied wheelchair, and the distant city pressing against the glass, and all of it amounting to a specific grade of solitude that he had not experienced since the years before the syndicate, when he was building something from materials no one else wanted, and the loneliness was at least purposeful. This loneliness had no purpose. This loneliness was just a man in a chair watching numbers leave his accounts and understanding that each one was not an expenditure but a communication. A message sent in the language of his own money, telling him what she thought of the situation, what she thought of him. I was the king of the city, but a pauper in my own home. He did not eat lunch. Not by design. He simply forgot, which was new. Sun Munhee had operated for 20 years on a schedule maintained with military precision, meals, meetings, the controlled architecture of days that left nothing to chance because chance was what killed people in his profession. The chair had disrupted the schedule in ways he hadn't anticipated, not the logistics, the inner clock. The mechanism that had always told him when the day required fuel had gone slightly out of calibration, and some afternoons he simply sat, and the light changed around him, and he noticed too late that several hours had passed without anything entering his body except tea. He was sitting in that specific, unanchored way when Vanessa appeared at the study door at 4:30. She looked at the untouched tray from noon, looked at him, did not editorialize. "I can have something prepared," she said. "Properly, it won't take long. I'm not hungry." She considered this with the particular quality of consideration she brought to statements she had decided to disagree with, but was choosing whether to contest. "You weren't hungry at noon either," she said. "Your body doesn't adjust that quickly to not needing anything." It was, he noted, the first time she had pushed back on something he said directly, not with volume, not with affect, with the quiet precision of a person who had decided that this particular instance was worth the risk. "Then prepare something," he said. She left without making it into a moment. He heard her in the kitchen. The sounds of actual cooking, not the reheating and plating that passed for meal preparation when he had a full formal staff operating on event schedules, but the foundational sounds. Water. A knife moving with the confident rhythm of someone who knew what they were doing before they did it professionally. The low breath of a gas flame catching. He did not know why this was notable. It simply was. The day's total by 5:15 had reached 147,300,000. He had done the conversion because the number in one had begun to feel abstract, the zeros too many to carry emotional weight. In American dollars, at current exchange, approximately 36,000. In the hours since she left, Phoebe had spent the equivalent of what his father had earned in 8 years pressing other men's shirts. He sat with that for a moment. Not with anger. He had moved past anger sometime around the third alert. What he sat with now was something colder and more architectural. The specific intellectual discomfort of a man who builds systems for a living confronting evidence that a system he trusted had been compromised from the inside, and that the compromise had been patient, and that the patience had been for this. For the chair. For the moment when the infrastructure around him was sufficiently disrupted that the extraction could begin in earnest. She was selling my life like stock, and she was already negotiating the price. He thought about the conversation she didn't know he'd overheard, the words she'd used. Set. 3 more months and I'm set. She had a horizon, a date by which the architecture needed to be complete, which meant she was not simply spending. She was positioning, building a record of financial entanglement, of shared accounts and established access and a paper trail that would read, to any future observer, as the normal expenditure of an engaged woman managing a household during a medical crisis. His crisis, her cover. The phone lit up at 5:40. Not an alert, a call, Beek Ryu. He answered. The Kwon dinner, Beek Ryu said without preamble. They had known each other long enough to skip the surface. Miss Shane called the Kwon family office this afternoon. She told them you were unlikely to attend, that your condition had progressed and public appearances were not advisable. The study was very quiet. He had told Phoebe 3 days ago that he would attend. She had smiled and said of course. She had then called the Kwon office and undone it before the day was out. Who else did she call? He asked. A pause, the kind of pause that contains a list. The Ree family, the Sung group's liaison, and a private number I'm still tracing. Each name was a weight. The Rees and the Sungs were not social contacts. They were adjacent to territory. They were the kind of names that appeared in conversations about power vacuums, about what happened to an organization when its head became, the word she had used at the hospital, unable. She was not simply spending his money. She was managing his disappearance. Keep tracing the number, he said. Tell no one else. Understood. Beek Ryu paused again. Boss, she is moving quickly. I know. If she reaches. I know, Ryu. He ended the call. Vanessa set a tray on the desk beside him at 6 without announcing herself, which he had come to understand was her specific shorthand for this is not a formal service. This is just food. You don't need to respond to it ceremonially. He looked at the bowl, doenjang jjiggy. Dense, correct, the kind of fermented depth that could not be manufactured from a hotel kitchen or a jar. It required time and a specific knowledge of ratios. He looked up at her. Where did you learn to make this? He asked. My mother, she said. Then, after a brief pause that held some private weather, she was particular about it. He looked back at the bowl. Something about the answer. The past tense. The particular compression of was particular, the way grief fits itself into grammatical tense when a person has been carrying it long enough that they no longer notice the weight until someone inadvertently touches it. He did not ask about the mother. He understood, without being able to fully account for the understanding, that she would tell him what she wanted to tell him, and that pressing would be a specific kind of damage. The instinct surprised him. He was not generally a man who concerned himself with what counted as damage to someone else's interior geography. Sit, he said. She stilled. Sir. For a moment. She sat, at the far edge of the chair across from him, the posture of someone maintaining a professional perimeter even while complying. He picked up the spoon. Ate. The flavor moved through him with the specific authority of something true, the way certain things bypass analysis and arrive directly as fact. The total today, he said, is approaching 40 million won. He watched her face. Nothing moved in it that hadn't already been there, which meant she had seen something. The statements, the alerts, something, or had observed Phoebe's departure and done her own arithmetic. Is it, she said. You're not surprised. A pause, the careful quality of someone deciding what they owe. Last week, Vanessa said slowly, I found a document on the printer, I don't know if it was left accidentally or if she simply forgot I would be the one to collect it. He set the spoon down. It was a valuation, she said. A formal one for the penthouse and 2 other properties. The room held its breath. She's having the assets appraised, he said. The document was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Vanessa said. Not the firm your household uses. A separate firm. A shadow infrastructure. A woman who had begun the legal groundwork for something before he came home from the hospital, which meant she had begun it while he was still in surgery, which meant the plan predated the chair by enough time to have engaged lawyers and filed paperwork and initiated formal valuation processes. This was not opportunism. This was preparation. He had been targeted before the convoy. The assassination attempt was not a coincidence that she had moved quickly to exploit. It was an event she had known was coming. They say money talks. In this penthouse, it was already writing the will. The full shape of it settled into place with the cold, perfect finality of a locked door. He picked up the spoon again, finished the soup, set the bowl aside with the careful control of a man who has just understood something vast and is not going to give the room the satisfaction of seeing him react to it. Edmund. Sir. Tomorrow morning. Don't let anyone into the study before I'm in it. She held his gaze for a moment. Something passing between them that was not warmth exactly, but was in the territory adjacent to it. The specific gravity of 2 people who have, without ceremony or announcement, arrived at the same side of something. Of course, she said, and took the tray and left him with the silence and the numbers and the full, cold knowledge of what was actually happening in his house. New diamonds for a funeral I wasn't dead enough for yet. She had ordered the flowers. She had booked the venue. She just needed the body. He had always trusted silence more than sound. Sound could be managed, constructed, delivered with the precise calibration of someone who understood that words were instruments, not confessions. But silence, the specific texture of it, the way it changed shape around a lie, that was harder to engineer. 20 years of running an organization built on loyalty enforced by consequence had made him fluent in the language of what people did not say. Which was why, at 2 a.m, he was awake. Not because of pain, not because the chair had made sleep impossible, though it had changed its architecture. He was awake because the penthouse had a silence that was wrong. The particular quality of a building where someone is trying to be quiet rather than simply being it. He sat in the dark of the study, had been there for an hour. No lights. The city pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass, Seoul at 2 a.m, indifferent and incandescent, and he sat within it like a man waiting for something he already knew was coming, but needed to see with his own eyes before he could act on it. The sound, when it came, was a door. The East Terrace, subtle, the kind of careful that announces itself to anyone listening for it. He did not move toward her. He wheeled to the interior edge of the study and stopped. The East Terrace ran adjacent to the study wall, a design feature he had specified during the renovation, because he liked the option of moving between the interior and the city air without transition. The glass panels were thick, but not impenetrable to sound when the terrace door was not fully sealed. She had not fully sealed it. Phoebe's voice came through in fragments first, low. The register she used when she was not performing, not for him, not for rooms, but for someone she was comfortable being real in front of. Moving faster than I thought, he's asking questions. A pause. The other voice was inaudible, phone pressed tight, but the rhythm of it carried through the glass. Short sentences, measured. I know, her voice sharpened. I know the timeline. I built the timeline. But he told Beek Ryu about the Kwon dinner and Ryu is. Another pause, longer. Ryu is loyal to him, obviously, which is exactly why he needs to be managed separately, not, she stopped, recalibrated. The sound of someone editing in real time. No, not like that. Not yet. The liability if something happens to Ryu before the paperwork clears is. He was very still. She was selling my life like stock, and she was already negotiating the price. He had built the Heon Syndicate on a principle he had never articulated aloud, because articulating it would have made it available to the people it was designed to protect against. The principle that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has already decided the outcome and is simply managing the sequence. He was hearing, through glass, a woman managing the sequence. The Mapo property needs to go first. Her voice had acquired the cadence of logistics. This was not anger or ambition or even greed. It was the tone of a professional reviewing a checklist. It's not tied to the syndicate's operational infrastructure, so it won't trigger the monitoring provisions. Once that transfer clears, the Gangnam title is next. The penthouse is last because it has the most visibility. A pause. He can't challenge it if the documentation predates the incident. That's why the valuation firm needed to be independent. If his lawyers look at the chain of title, everything will read as pre-existing estate planning. Standard for a man in his position. The other voice, brief, a question. His signature, she made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite contempt, something that lived in the narrow space between them. He signs 40 documents a day. His administrative assistant flags them, he signs. All I need is the right document in the right stack at the right moment. It's not complicated. The complicated part was getting access to the stack. Silence. That part, she said, is already handled. He sat in the dark for a long time after she came back inside. He heard her footsteps cross the main hall, heard the elevator, heard the mechanical sigh of it ascending to the upper floor where the master's suite sat. He did not move. The information arranged itself in his mind with the cold, spatial precision of a man who had spent his adult life reading threats. She had 3 properties in her architecture. She had an independent valuation trail. She had access to his document flow. She had, somewhere in the chain of process, a person close enough to his administrative operations to place a document where he would sign it without reading it in full. He signed 40 documents a day. The number, which had never troubled him before tonight, now had a different weight. They say money talks. She had given it a whole separate vocabulary, and I hadn't even known it was learning to speak. He thought about the firm. The name Vanessa had mentioned, the one from the printer, the one that wasn't his household's counsel. He had passed it to a contact 2 days ago for background. The response, which had arrived that afternoon and which he had read and set aside pending confirmation, was now relevant in a different register. The firm had been engaged 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago, he was not in a wheelchair. 7 weeks ago, he was operational, visible, conducting the normal business of an organization that ran on his continued functioning. The engagement predated the convoy ambush by a full month. She had hired lawyers before the shooting. The shooting he had survived. The shooting that his own intelligence suggested had been contracted from within a circle narrow enough to fit in one room. He pulled his phone from the armrest pocket. The number he called was answered on the second ring despite the hour, because the man on the other end maintained the sleep schedule of someone in a profession that did not allow for unavailability. The convoy, Munhee said. The sourcing, where are you? His head of security did not ask why he was calling at 2 a.m. Still working the chain. We have 3 candidates, 1 internal, 2 external with internal access. The internal candidate. A logistics coordinator, mid-level, handled route scheduling. His financials. Clean on the surface. Offshore account opened 4 months ago. Small deposits, irregular intervals. Someone feeding him carefully. 4 months ago, 3 months before the ambush. 1 month before Phoebe engaged the law firm. The sequence was becoming a sentence. Find the account's origin, Munhee said. Tonight if you can. He ended the call. Vanessa found him there at 6:15, when she arrived to open the east wing. She did not ask why he was in the unlit study at that hour. She turned on the low lamp at the side table, not the overhead, not the full room light, the precise level of illumination a person chooses when they understand that someone in the space may not be ready for full exposure, and set down the morning tea without comment. He looked, he knew, like a man who had not slept, because he had not slept. She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating quiet that he had come to recognize as her specific form of concern, not performing worry, simply taking accurate stock. "The terrace door seal needs replacing," she said. "I noticed it last week. The frame has shifted and it doesn't close flush." He looked at her. She looked back. It was not an explanation for anything. It was simply an observation about a door. She held his gaze with the complete composure of someone who has said precisely what they meant and nothing beyond it. "Have it replaced," he said. "I'll arrange it today." She turned to leave. Edmund, he did not know entirely why he said what he said next. Perhaps because it was 6 in the morning, and he had been sitting with the architecture of his own dismantling for 4 hours, and the human need to be witnessed by someone without agenda had overcome his professional habit of self-containment. "When you found that document, the valuation." She stopped, did not turn immediately. "You could have said nothing," he said. "Most people would have." She turned then. Her expression held a quality he had been trying to name for days, something that was neither loyalty, nor sympathy, nor professional obligation, but contained elements of all three while being reducible to none of them. "Most people," she said carefully, "don't know what it costs to say nothing." The statement arrived with the particular gravity of something drawn from experience, not performed, not positioned. The kind of thing a person says only when the saying costs them something, which meant it was true, which meant there was history behind it that she had not offered and he had not asked for. He would not ask for it now. But he noted it, filed it with the growing architecture of her, the accumulation of details that were assembling, without his permission, into something that warranted more attention than he had originally allocated. The quiet ones always see the most, but the ones who choose, deliberately, what to do with what they see, those are the ones who decide how the story ends. The confirmation came at 8:47. A message, 2 lines, the account origin he had asked his head of security to trace. He read it twice. The offshore account feeding payments to the logistics coordinator, the man who had scheduled the convoy route, who had made the organization's movements available to whoever, had contracted the ambush, traced back, through 2 shell layers that had been constructed to look impenetrable, but had not anticipated this specific quality of forensic attention to a holding company. Registered 7 months ago. Director listed, a name he did not recognize. But the registered address was an apartment in Ipgujeong. An apartment he paid for. An apartment in which Phoebe Shane had lived for 11 months, before moving into his penthouse. He set the phone down on the desk with the careful, deliberate placement of a man, ensuring that his hands remain visible and controlled, because the alternative was to let them do something that would compromise the patience he had spent weeks building. She had not simply known about the ambush. She had funded the infrastructure that made it possible. The shopping sprees, the lawyers, the valuation firms, the managed social calendar and the document in the signing stack and the phone calls at 2 in the morning. All of it was not opportunism and was not even greed in its ordinary form. It was the final phase of a plan that had begun before he was shot, before the chair, before any of the narrative he had told himself about a woman who loved him poorly. There had never been a version of this story that did not end with his removal. He had simply been the last one in the room to read it. She was selling my life like stock, and I finally understood she had shorted it before the price dropped. She was the reason the price dropped. He picked up his phone, called Beek Ryu. 3 words, watch the documents. Then he sat in the study with the city outside the window and the tea going cold beside him and the full, absolute knowledge of what he was dealing with. And he began, for the first time since the chair, to think not about surviving this, but about what he intended to build from the wreckage of it. And who, when it was done, would be standing beside him. The rain came in off the Han at noon. Not the aggressive summer rain that arrived with announcement, thunder first, then the sky making good on its threat. This was the other kind, the kind that simply appeared, gray and settled, and without urgency, the kind his mother had called patient rain because it had nowhere else to be and knew it. It pressed against the penthouse glass like something that wanted in and had decided waiting was acceptable. Mun-hee had been at the desk since 7. Not working. The documents were open, but he had not been reading them. He had been doing the thing he did when a problem had exceeded the reach of immediate action, sitting inside it. Letting the full geometry of it become familiar. A man who moves against an enemy before he fully understands the enemy's architecture makes noise. Noise creates variables. Variables killed people in his profession, and he had survived this long precisely because he had never once confused urgency with readiness. He understood the enemy's architecture now. What he was doing this morning, in the gray rain, in the silence of a penthouse that had become something closer to a surveillance post than a home, was deciding what came next. He heard her before he saw her. Not footsteps. Vanessa's footsteps had never been the kind that announced themselves. It was the smell. It reached the study doorway several seconds before she did, moving through the climate-controlled air of the penthouse with the specific authority of something that did not belong to this environment and knew it. Doenjang, sesame, the deep, low register of something that had been simmering for longer than convenience required. He looked up from the documents. She appeared in the doorway with a tray that was larger than the usual service, not the spare, functional arrangement of a morning tea delivery, but something with weight and intention. A stone bowl, sealed with a lid that was doing insufficient work containing what was inside it. A smaller dish beside it. A folded cloth. 2 items that his eyes moved across and then returned to, because they did not belong in the catalog of a Gangnam penthouse. A pair of wooden chopsticks. The plain, unvarnished kind. The kind sold in paper sleeves at Pajangmatcha stalls for 201. He looked at the tray, looked at her. "It's not a formal meal," she said. The preamble of someone who has decided to do something that falls slightly outside the defined boundaries of their role and is acknowledging that fact without apologizing for it. "You haven't eaten properly in 2 days." "I ate yesterday." Toast is not eating. She set the tray on the desk without waiting for permission, a small escalation in the ongoing negotiation of what she was and wasn't allowed to do in his presence. "This will be better." She lifted the lid from the stone bowl. The steam rose and the smell came with it, fully, without the dilution of distance, and something happened in Mun-hee's chest that he did not immediately have a category for. Not hunger, or not only hunger. Something older than hunger. Something that lived below the level of appetite in the stratigraphy of a person, in the layer where the body keeps its earliest records, before the mind learned to curate them. A taste of home, in a fortress of enemies. Sunjabujejigi. Soft tofu. Pork. Gochugaru in a quantity that suggested she had made a specific judgment about his tolerance for heat. Zucchini cut in the particular diagonal that his mother had always used, which he recognized with the specific, unwelcome precision of sensory memory. The way certain things bypass 20 years of constructed identity and arrive directly at the child who existed before the construction began. He had not eaten this dish since his mother's kitchen. Not in 20 years. Not in any of the restaurants his position afforded access to. Not in the private dining rooms of the establishments that catered to men like him. Not once in the decade he had spent building a life so thoroughly removed from a 2-room apartment in Mapo that the apartment had become, in his interior geography, less a memory than a theoretical place. Somewhere that had existed in a previous iteration of a person he no longer fully recognized. He picked up the wooden chopsticks. Did not speak. Ate. The first mouthful was not a taste. It was a timestamp. His mother at the stove at 6 a.m, winter, the apartment cold enough that the steam from the pot was visible as a second presence in the kitchen. She cooked in silence. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone for whom the act itself was sufficient communication. The meal was the sentence. Here is heat. Here is the effort of heat. Here is what I know how to give you that costs me something to make. He had been 14. Running numbers for men whose names he did not know in full. Coming home after midnight with cash in his jacket that his mother pretended not to see because seeing it would have required a response, and a response would have cost them both something neither could afford. She would leave the pot on the low flame. He would eat alone at the table. She would be in the other room, but the meal meant she had waited. The meal always meant she had waited. They say home is a place. It isn't. Home is a temperature, and I had been cold for 20 years without nomming it. He set the chopsticks down. Vanessa was at the edge of the room, not leaving, not intruding, occupying the particular position she had developed over weeks of reading the space around him. Present enough to respond, removed enough to not require management. "Where did you source the tofu?" he asked. His voice was level. The question was not about tofu. "There's a market in Mapo," she said. "The early vendors. The stone bowl is better with fresh curd. The shelf-stable variety doesn't hold the heat the same way." "Mapo." He looked at her. "You went to Mapo this morning." "I was there before 6, she said it without drama. The rain was manageable. She had risen before 6 in the morning, traveled to a market in a district that was not on the way to anything convenient, sourced specific ingredients, returned, and cooked for the better part of 2 hours. For a meal he had not requested. For a man she worked for. For a reason she had not offered and he had not been given a framework to interpret. "That's outside your duties," he said. "Yes," she said. He waited for the rest of the sentence. It did not come. She had done it because she had decided to do it. That was the full accounting. No further architecture. He picked up the chopsticks again. They remained in the same room for the better part of an hour. Him eating, slowly, in the manner of someone who has stopped eating for fuel and started eating as the act itself. Her near the window, ostensibly reviewing the household schedule on the small tablet she carried, though he noted she turned the page less frequently than the content would require. The rain continued its patient work against the glass. "My mother made this," he said. He had not planned to say it. It arrived with the same inevitability as the memory, bypassing the editorial process he applied to everything that left his mouth. Same ratios, same cut on the zucchini. Vanessa did not look up from the tablet immediately, gave the statement room to exist before responding to it. "It's a specific diagonal. Most people cut straight across." She was particular about it. A pause, brief. The faint resonance of a phrase returned. She had used those words herself, weeks ago, about her own mother. Was particular. The past tense they had both found themselves using. "Mine too," Vanessa said, quietly, to the window rather than to him. The room held that for a moment. He did not press. She did not expand. But something had shifted in the geometry of the space between them, a boundary not crossed but acknowledged, which was its own kind of crossing. At 1:30, Phoebe came home. He heard the elevator before he heard her, the mechanical announcement of its arrival, then the doors, then the heels beginning their declarative passage across the main hall. He noted the time. She had been gone since the previous afternoon. He did not ask where. She appeared in the study doorway and took in the scene with the rapid, comprehensive assessment she applied to any room she entered. Him at the desk, the tray, Vanessa at the window, and her expression moved through several calculations before settling on a particular arrangement that was warm on the surface and something else underneath. "You're eating," a performance of pleasant surprise. "Good, you need to keep your strength up." She crossed to him, kissed the air beside his temple. Her eyes moved across the tray with a flicker of attention that stopped on the stone bowl, the wooden chopsticks, the particular smell that was not the smell of the personal chef she had retained 4 months ago. Her gaze moved to Vanessa. "This is outside the kitchen staff's remit," she said. The tone was pleasant. The pleasantness was a coat over something with edges. "We have a chef for a reason." "Mr. Sun needed to eat," Vanessa said, the same neutral register, a weather report. "Mr. Sun has staff for that." Phoebe's smile remained precisely calibrated. "In future, coordinate with the kitchen rather than improvising. It creates confusion in the household structure." "A beat." "Of course," Vanessa said. Phoebe turned back to him, reset, the administrative efficiency of a woman who had delivered a correction and moved on. I ran into the Bay family this morning. They're asking about you. I told them you were progressing well. A small pause loaded with the particular weight of a lie being offered as consideration. It's better if people hear that. It keeps the speculation down. He looked at her. She was managing his public condition the same way she was managing his assets, controlling the narrative from the outside while the interior collapsed. The speculation she wanted to suppress was not concern for his reputation. It was the attention of people who would notice, if they looked, what was happening to his holdings. "Thank you," he said, evenly. She searched his face for a moment, looking, he understood, for evidence of what he knew. Finding only the surface he chose to show her, which was nothing. She smiled again and left to change. Vanessa collected the tray, in the silence that followed. He watched her hands, the same unhurried precision they brought to every task, the same absence of performance. She stacked the dishes with the care of someone returning borrowed things. "She'll make it difficult for you," he said. Vanessa paused, not with surprise, with the stillness of someone receiving information they have already modeled. "I know. You could have not come this morning. The market, the cooking, stayed within the boundaries she prefers." She looked at him then, direct, the quality he had come to rely on as a fixed point in a house where every other gaze contained an angle. "The boundaries she prefers," Vanessa said, "are designed to make sure you don't notice the difference between someone caring for you and someone managing you." A pause, brief. "I noticed the difference. I thought you should too." She picked up the tray and left. He sat with the rain against the glass and the residual warmth of a stone bowl that had traveled from a market in Mapo at 6 in the morning, and understood that the most dangerous thing that had happened in this penthouse had nothing to do with missing documents or offshore accounts or a woman on the terrace at 2 in the morning. The most dangerous thing was simpler. Someone had reminded him what it felt like to matter to another person. Not his position, not his assets, not the chair and not the throne. Him. A taste of home in a fortress of enemies. And the problem with tasting something real after years of eating ash is that you can never fully pretend the ash was enough. He noticed the change on a Wednesday. Not because Wednesday held significance, because the pattern broke on a Wednesday, and broken patterns were the only calendar that had ever mattered to him. In his profession, routine was not comfort, routine was camouflage. The moment someone deviated from their established rhythm, they were telling you something. The deviation was always the message. Phoebe's established rhythm, catalogued across 3 weeks of observation, was consistent in its indifference. Mornings, brief, transitional, oriented toward departure. Afternoons, absent, evenings, variable but always self-contained. She moved through his recovery the way weather moves through a building under renovation, present as a condition, not as a participant. On Wednesday, she brought him his medication herself. He was at the desk when she appeared. No announcement, no heels-on marble for warning. She came from the direction of the east corridor rather than the main stairs, which was itself a deviation, wearing the particular expression he had learned to read as warmth and deployment. Not warmth, the strategic application of its appearance. She was carrying the small tray his medications arrived on each morning, usually delivered by the overnight nurse his doctor had arranged, always at 7:15. It was now 7:40. The nurse had to leave early, Phoebe said. The explanation arrived before he asked for it, which meant it had been prepared. "Family thing, I told her I'd handle it." She set the tray on the desk beside him. He looked at it. 3 medications. His doctor had specified 2. The third was a small white capsule in a separate dish, slightly apart from the others in the specific arrangement of something that wanted to appear incidental while being anything but. "New prescription?" he asked. "The doctor called yesterday." She was already moving toward the window, creating the casual distance of someone who has delivered a thing and is no longer attached to it. He said with the nerve inflammation, a supplement was advisable, something to help with the progression. She said progression the way a person says a word they have chosen carefully from a list of available options. Not healing, not recovery. Progression, a word that contained no directional commitment. He looked at the capsule. "Which doctor?" he said. A fractional pause. "Dr. Lim." Dr. Lim was his official physician. The man whose name appeared on the documentation, whose consultations were on record, who had delivered the diagnosis of spinal damage to the assembled household with the appropriate gravity. He was also the man Munhee had not spoken to in 6 days, because Dr. Lim had a second phone number, the one tied to the genuine relationship, the one that operated outside the documented record, and that number had been silent. Dr. Lim had not called yesterday. She finally moved from neglect to cold-blooded murder, and she delivered it on a tray with the other vitamins, like she was doing him a kindness. "I'll take them shortly," he said. "Leave it." She turned. The warmth and deployment shifted slightly, recalibrating. She had expected him to take the medication while she was in the room. The expectation was visible in the half-second before she adjusted. "Of course," she smiled, moved toward the door, stopped with the practiced spontaneity of someone executing a prepared beat. "Oh, I was thinking dinner tonight, together, properly. I'll have the chef do something." A pause. "It's been a while." It had been 3 weeks. She had not proposed dinner in 3 weeks. "That would be fine," he said. She left. He sat very still and looked at the capsule in its separate dish, and understood that the dinner invitation and the medication had arrived together because they were the same sentence. The dinner was the normalcy. The capsule was the content. He called the private number at 7:45. Dr. Lim answered immediately. Background noise, a hospital corridor, the particular ambient texture of a place where people were working. "The third medication," Munhee said, no preamble. Silence on the line. Then, "What third medication?" "On my morning tray, white capsule, separate dish." "I prescribed nothing new." The doctor's voice had acquired the compressed quality of a man rapidly revising his understanding of a situation. "Nothing has changed in your protocol. If something arrived on that tray that I didn't authorize." "It arrived." A longer silence. "Don't take it," Dr. Lim said. "I hadn't." "Send it to me, not through any channel connected to the household, outside that entirely. I'll have it analyzed through the hospital's independent toxicology service, discreetly." A pause. "Boss, if someone is altering your medication." "Handle it quietly," Munhee said. "Nothing moves until I have the analysis." He ended the call. He picked up the capsule between 2 fingers and held it against the light from the window. Ordinary in every visible respect. The precise appearance of something designed to look like it belonged in the company of legitimate things, which was, he reflected, an accurate description of the woman who had delivered it. He placed it in a small evidence bag, the kind he kept in the locked lower drawer of the desk, because a man in his position maintained certain supplies the way other men kept fire extinguishers, sealed it, and sent it through the private courier channel Dr. Lim would understand without instruction. Then he rearranged the tray, took his actual 2 medications, left the separate dish empty in a way that could be read as having been consumed. The dinner was architectural. She had arranged the table personally. He noted this because personal arrangement was not within her established pattern, because she had always delegated environment to staff. Candles, the good service, a bottle of wine from the cellar that required knowledge of his preferences she had not previously demonstrated interest in deploying. She was wearing the kind of dress that communicated effort, deliberate, visible effort, the kind that says, "I am trying," which is designed to make the observer feel that the trying is for them. He sat across from her in the chair and watched her construct the evening. She asked about his comfort, about the physiotherapy schedule, about whether he was sleeping. Each question arrived with the attentiveness of a woman rediscovering interest in a person she had temporarily mislaid, and each question was also, he understood, reconnaissance. She was taking inventory, checking the state of the asset. Money doesn't talk. Sometimes it dresses for dinner and pours the wine and asks how you're feeling, and what it's really asking is how much longer. You seem better, she said, over the second course, her eyes on him with a quality of attention he had not seen since the early weeks of their relationship, before the shape of the warmth had become visible as a shape rather than the real thing. Better than what? He said. She smiled. Then last week, you seem more present. I've had time to think. About what? He looked at her across the candles. The future. Something moved in her expression. Small. Involuntary. The word future had landed differently than she anticipated, which told him her version of the future had a specific shape, and she was monitoring for evidence that his version aligned with it. That's good, she said carefully. That's healthy. You should be thinking about the future. I am, he said. He found Vanessa in the kitchen at 9:15, after Phoebe had taken a call, and disappeared to the upper floor with the phone pressed hard against her ear. The posture of someone conducting a conversation they considered urgent. The kitchen was cleaned and closed for the night. Vanessa was at the far counter, writing something in the small notebook she used for household inventory. She looked up when he came through. He had learned, over weeks, that she read the quality of his silences accurately. This one she read in under 3 seconds. The notebook closed. Is there something specific you need tonight? She asked. Information, he said. The overnight nurse. What reason was she given for the early departure this morning? Vanessa's expression remained composed, but something in her eyes sharpened with the precision of a person, confirming a suspicion they had been carrying without sufficient evidence to voice. She told me she received a message from Miss Shane's assistant at 6:30, Vanessa said. She was told her shift had been restructured, that her services weren't needed until the afternoon. A pause. She was confused because no one from your medical team had contacted her directly. The message had not come from the medical team. It had come from Phoebe's assistant, which meant Phoebe had managed the nurse's departure before 7, which meant the window for the medication tray had been created deliberately, which meant the capsule had been prepared in advance of this morning. This was not improvisation. This had been staged. The nurse, he said, is she trustworthy? She's been with the same agency for 9 years. No complaints, no incidents. A brief pause. I checked her background when she was assigned. I check everyone assigned to direct care. She said it without apology, without flagging it as an overstep, as a simple statement of practice. He looked at her. You checked her. I check everyone, she said again. Who has access to you? Who handles anything that goes directly to you? A pause with weather in it. I started doing it in the 2nd week. The 2nd week, before she had any formal reason, before he had indicated awareness of the threat or asked for her involvement. She had simply assessed the environment and determined that someone should be paying close attention to the things that reached him directly, and she had become that person without being invited to. The quiet ones always see the most, but the ones who act on what they see, those are the ones who change how the story ends. The tray this morning, he said. Did you see it before she brought it in? Something crossed her face, the expression of a person who has an answer that costs them something. I prepared the tray, she said. At 7, the usual arrangement, 2 medications, water, a small glass of juice. I left it on the nurse's station for handover. A pause, the precise weight of what came next sitting visibly before she released it. When I came back through at 7:25, the tray had been moved, and there was a 3rd item on it. The room was very still. She had seen it, had registered the deviation, had not removed it, because removing it would have declared a knowledge she couldn't safely declare, in a house where declaring the wrong knowledge to the wrong person was its own form of danger. You left it, he said. I left it, she confirmed, because removing it would have told her that someone in this house was watching closely enough to notice, and I didn't know yet, she stopped, edited. I didn't know if you had seen it. He had seen it. I sent it for analysis, he said. Her breath released by a degree, small, controlled, the exhale of someone who has been holding a specific weight and has just been told they can set it down. Good, she said. One word. the most loaded single syllable she had produced in weeks of careful, measured speech. He looked at her in the kitchen light, this woman who had quietly, without appointment or instruction, built a parallel layer of protection around him, who had checked the staff, watched the trays, mapped the movements of the people in this house with the systematic attention of someone who understood that danger did not always arrive loudly. Who had every reason, he was beginning to understand, to let whatever was happening to him happen. And had chosen otherwise. "Edmund," he said. She met his eyes. "Be careful," he said. "She will notice that someone is watching." Vanessa held his gaze. The steadiness of a person who has already done the risk calculation and arrived at their position. "She already does," she said quietly. "She just doesn't know it's me." She finally moved from neglect to cold-blooded murder. And the only thing standing between the capsule and my bloodstream was a woman in a maid's uniform who had been quietly guarding a door no one had asked her to guard. The toxicology report came back on a Thursday. Dr. Lim delivered it through the private channel, a single document, 4 pages, the clinical language of it doing insufficient work containing what it described. The capsule had contained a compound, not a poison in the dramatic, traceable sense, something more sophisticated. A synthetic formulation designed to interact specifically with the medications he was already taking, the legitimate ones, and accelerate what the documentation around his condition had already established as a plausible trajectory. Not murder with fingerprints. Murder with plausible deniability. A man with a spinal injury whose condition worsened, whose system, under the stress of recovery, simply declined, whose death, reviewed by any physician working from the official record, would read as the natural conclusion of documented damage. He read the report twice, folded it, placed it in the locked drawer beside the evidence bag that now held only the chain of custody documentation. Then he sat in the dark study for a long time and did something he had not done since his mother's funeral. Nothing. Not planning, not mapping, not running the architecture of response through its possible iterations, just sitting with the full, unmediated weight of what had been attempted, allowing it to be what it was before converting it into a problem to be solved. Someone had tried to kill him. Not with a convoy ambush, that had the quality of an opening move, large and declarative. This was the endgame piece, quiet, personal, delivered by hand by a woman who had kissed the air beside his face and asked if he was sleeping well. They say money talks. She had taken out a contract on my life and served it with the good china. He could not sleep. This was not new. Sleep had become a negotiation since the chair, the body adjusting to the mechanics of a different relationship with horizontal surfaces, the mind refusing to fully disengage in an environment it had correctly identified as hostile. He had learned to rest in the chair by the window, the city below providing the specific ambient continuity that his nervous system apparently required. It was past midnight when he heard her. Not footsteps. A sound from the kitchen, the careful, minimal sound of someone moving through a space in the dark without turning on lights. The sound of someone who had learned the geography of a room well enough to navigate it without illumination, and was trying not to wake anyone in the process. He wheeled to the kitchen doorway. Vanessa stood at the counter in the dark with a glass of water, still dressed. She had not, apparently, been to sleep either. She turned when she heard the wheel on the threshold. Did not startle. The quality of someone whose alertness, even at this hour, was already present. "Sir," no apology for being there, no performance of surprise. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down," he said. "Both of us are awake. We might as well be awake in the same room." She sat at the kitchen table. He parked across from her, in the way he had learned to position the chair for conversations, slightly angled, so the frame did not become the first thing between him and another person. The kitchen held its particular nighttime quality, the residual warmth of earlier cooking, the low hum of refrigeration, the city a distant register beyond the sealed windows. A different atmosphere from the study, less formal. The kind of space where the architecture of professional distance became harder to maintain at midnight. He had not planned to say what he said. "The report came back," he said. She wrapped both hands around her glass. "I assumed it would today. The compound was designed to interact with my existing medications. Progressive decline, nothing attributable." She was quiet for a long moment. Not with shock, with the specific stillness of someone receiving confirmation of something they had already built a model for and had been hoping the model was wrong. "How long?" she said, not a question about the timeline of the compound. He understood she was asking something adjacent. How long had this been the plan? "The law firm was engaged 7 months ago," he said. "The account that funded the convoy was opened 4 months before the ambush." She absorbed this, set the glass down. Something in her expression, not grief exactly, but the particular expression of someone watching a structure they had been observing at a distance, finally confirm its intention to fall. "She planned it before she knew about the chair," Vanessa said. "Before the chair existed," he said. "The chair was hers, the ambush was hers, all of it was a sequence." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her across the table. The kitchen light was off, only the ambient glow from the city through the high window, and in that light she had the quality of someone stripped of the professional surface that daytime required. Not vulnerable, simply present, the actual person rather than the arranged one. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice had a different register, not the measured, weather report tone of professional speech, something underneath it that had been waiting for the right conditions to surface. He waited. "Your legs," she said. The kitchen held its breath. "I've known for some time," she said carefully, "that your condition is not what the documentation describes." He looked at her. "3 weeks ago," she continued, her eyes on the table rather than his face, moving through the account with the precision of someone who has rehearsed it and is now delivering it as accurately as they can. "You were in the study late. The door was not fully closed. I was in the corridor. I wasn't listening for anything specific. I was checking the window seals after the weather warning." A pause. "You stood up." The kitchen. The city outside. The hum of the refrigerator. "You were at the window," she said, "for approximately 30 seconds. Then you sat back down. You didn't know I was there. I didn't announce myself because—" She stopped, chose the next words with visible care. "Because I understood immediately that it wasn't for me to announce. That whatever you were doing, whatever reason existed for the chair, it was yours, not mine." He said nothing. She looked up then, met his eyes with the direct, undeflected quality that was simply her constitution, not courage in the performative sense, just the basic structural honesty of a person who had decided a long time ago that looking away was its own kind of damage. "I never told anyone," she said. "I never referenced it. I never changed how I behaved toward you in a way that would indicate I knew, because if she—" a slight compression. "If Miss Shane had any indication that someone in this house knew the chair wasn't permanent and that someone hadn't immediately told her." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "The secret she kept was the first time I felt human in years. Not because she protected the plan. Because she understood, without being told, that the man inside the plan needed protecting too." He sat with it. The thing about being known, genuinely known, in the specific sense of having a truth about yourself held by another person without being used, was that it had a physical quality he had forgotten. A weight lifted that he had stopped noticing was there. He had carried the performance of the chair across every interaction for weeks, with his lieutenants, with his legal team, with Phoebe, always with Phoebe, the sustained, meticulous performance of limitation. With Vanessa, in this kitchen at midnight, the performance was no longer required. He did not stand up, but the requirement to pretend that he couldn't was gone, and the absence of it was its own form of relief. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said. 4 days. The precision of it, she had counted. "You continued to behave exactly as before," he said. "Yes." The physiotherapy sessions, the medication management, the ramps in the corridor. All of it, she said. Nothing changed. He thought about this. The discipline required to hold knowledge that's significant and behave in its complete absence. The specific, sustained performance of not knowing, which was, he understood, the mirror image of what he had been doing. Two people in the same house, each carrying a secret about his legs, each performing ignorance for entirely different reasons. "Why are you telling me now?" he asked. She considered this with the honesty of someone who does not reach for easy answers. "Because the report came back," she said, "and you're sitting in a kitchen at midnight and I think," a pause, the weather in it, "I think you've been carrying the full weight of this alone for long enough, and I am telling you because you should know that you haven't been as alone in it as you thought." The simplicity of the statement. He had built an organization on the principle that trust was a liability, had spent 20 years converting every human relationship into a transaction, because transactions had legible terms and relationships had none. Had arrived at 42 in a wheelchair, a real wheelchair, then a chosen one in a penthouse full of people who wanted something from him, and had assumed, with the weary accuracy of a man who has been right about this long enough to stop questioning it, that this was simply the topology of his world. She had known his secret for 25 days. Had told no one. Had used it for nothing. Had simply held it the way you hold something that belongs to someone else, carefully, without claiming it, waiting for the moment it could be returned. I was the king of the city, but a pauper in my own home. She was the first person in years who gave me something without a price attached, and I didn't know what to do with free. "Your brother," he said. She stilled. He had known for some time. His head of security had flagged it in the second week. A background sweep, routine, the kind he ran on anyone with sustained access to his person. Vanessa Edmond, late 20s. Former medical student, third year, withdrawn under circumstances that the academic record noted as personal and the financial record clarified as the suspension of a scholarship tied to a legal incident he was still having fully traced. A younger brother. A debt to a crew operating in the eastern districts under a name that connected, at 2 removes, to a rival organization. She was in his house for reasons that were not purely professional. He had known this. He had also watched her daily, choose the harder thing anyway. "I know about the debt," he said. The color did not leave her face. She had the composure of someone who has rehearsed for this specific moment and is now inside it. But her hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. The only tell. "How long?" she said. 3 weeks. The symmetry of it settled between them. He had known about her brother for the same duration she had known about his legs. 2 people sitting across a kitchen table, each having carried the other's secret in silence, each having chosen, independently, not to weaponize it. She looked at him. Something in her expression was working through the mathematics of this. What it meant that he knew, what it meant that he had said nothing, what the fact of his silence across 3 weeks communicated about his intentions. "He's safe," Munhi said. "For now, the debt is being managed." Her breath left her. The specific, involuntary exhale of someone who has been holding a particular fear for so long that its sudden partial release is almost destabilizing. "I didn't tell you," she said quietly, "to get." "I know," he said. "I wasn't trading." "I know, Edmund." She stopped, looked at him across the kitchen table in the dark. Her eyes had the quality of someone who has been waiting a long time to be believed and is not entirely sure yet that they are. He looked back. "Neither was I," he said. The kitchen held them both in its particular midnight stillness. No transaction on the table. No agenda operating beneath the surface of the conversation. Simply 2 people who had been carrying each other's weight in silence, finding out simultaneously that the carrying had been mutual. In his adult life, he could count on one hand the number of moments that had felt like this. He was running out of fingers. The secret she kept was the first time I felt human in years, not the secret itself, the reason she kept it. She wasn't protecting the plan. She was protecting me, and I hadn't known those were different things until she showed me they were. Beek Ryu requested a meeting on a Friday morning. Not unusual. Ryu had always been the most formally structured of his lieutenants, the one who scheduled rather than appeared, who prepared agendas rather than improvising, whose operational discipline had made him indispensable across 12 years of working together. Mun-hee had trusted him with more than he had trusted any other person in the organization's architecture. Not completely. He had never trusted anyone completely. But within the specific parameters of professional loyalty, Ryu had been the fixed point. The request arrived through the proper channel, formatted correctly. Time proposed, agenda listed, quarterly operational review, succession planning protocols, asset management restructure. Succession planning. The phrase sat in the message like a stone in still water. He confirmed the meeting for 11. He had been expecting movement for 2 weeks. Not because he had intelligence indicating it, though he had that too, accumulated through the parallel channels he had maintained since the chair. He had been expecting it because he understood the psychology of the men he had built his organization around. He had selected them, in part, for exactly the qualities that made them dangerous in a vacuum of power. Ambition precise enough to be useful, self-interest disciplined enough to function as loyalty, while the incentive structure held. The incentive structure was a man in a wheelchair who had not been seen at a meeting in 6 weeks. In his world, absence was not a medical condition. Absence was an invitation. I let them think I was dying so they would show me their daggers. What I didn't anticipate was how many daggers there were. They arrived together. This was the first data point. Ryu had listed the meeting as bilateral, himself and Mun-hee, standard operational review. What came through the penthouse doors at 11 was Ryu +2. Oh Sungjin, who handled the Northern Territory distribution. Kwak Do-hyun, the organization's financial architect, the man who knew where everyone was structured and why. 3 men, a quorum. He noted it, said nothing. They arranged themselves in the chairs across from his desk with the practiced ease of people who had choreographed the seating in advance. Ryu in the center, the position of the person conducting, not reporting. Sungjin to his left, Kwak to his right, Mun-hee in the wheelchair on the other side of the desk, slightly lower than all of them, which was also not accidental. They had thought about the geometry. "Thank you for making time," Ryu began. The tone of a man who has decided that the meeting he is initiating is a courtesy extended to the person receiving it, rather than the standard direction of obligation. "Quarterly review," Mun-hee said. "Proceed." Ryu opened a folder. Actual paper, which told its own story. Paper was for records, for things you wanted physically documented. The organization's operational status over the past 6 weeks has been, a measured pause, contingent. Several decisions have required immediate response without the benefit of your direct guidance. Which decisions? Sungjin shifted slightly. The Incheon distribution contract came up for renewal. The other party had a 48-hour window. We needed to move. How did you move? We extended at a 15% reduction. Sungjin said it with the practiced neutrality of a man reporting a fait accompli. The other party, Mun-hee said, was leveraged. They had no alternative supplier within the required timeline. A 15% reduction was unnecessary and was not authorized. Silence. The timeline required, Sungjin began. The timeline was manufactured, Mun-hee said. They manufactured urgency because they understood that decisions were being made without me reviewing them. You negotiated from a position of anxiety rather than strength because you had decided, for reasons I'd like you to articulate clearly, that my involvement was not required. The room had a different quality now than when the 3 of them had arranged themselves in their considered geometry. The quality of men recalibrating. Ryu spoke. With respect, and I say this with genuine concern for your recovery, the operational demands of the organization cannot sustain an indefinite period of remote management. Decisions require authority. In your absence, that authority has to come from somewhere. He delivered it well. Mun-hee acknowledged this privately. Ryu had always been excellent at packaging ambition as concern. It was one of the qualities that had made him useful. "And you've determined," Mun-hee said, "that the somewhere is you." Ryu met his eyes. "I've determined that the organization needs a functioning leadership structure, which, given your current condition, requires adaptation." Adaptation, the word of the month. Everyone was adapting to his condition. Phoebe adapting his accounts. His lieutenants adapting his authority. The word was doing substantial work in the service of people who wanted what he had and needed his incapacity to justify taking it. "Quack," Mun-hee said, turning to the financial architect. "The restructure you've proposed, walk me through it." Quack was the most careful of the three. The quality of his caution was visible in the slight adjustment of his posture, the recognition that the meeting was not proceeding according to the prepared script. The restructure is designed to ensure operational continuity, a distributed authority model with defined decision-making lanes for each. "Show me the document." A pause. Quack opened his own folder, slid a document across the desk. Mun-hee read it. It was thorough. He gave them that. The language was appropriate, interim management framework, recovery contingent, subject to restoration of full executive capacity, and every clause was precisely crafted to sound temporary while establishing mechanisms that were structural. Authority thresholds that would require his explicit reversal rather than simply expiring. Reporting lines that redirected through Ryu's office. Financial approval chains that bypassed his direct authorization for anything under a threshold that, he noted, covered approximately 60% of routine operational decisions. It was not a temporary measure. It was a transfer, dressed as a precaution. And at the bottom, a signature line. His name, pre-typed, a pen resting beside the document with the casual placement of something that expected to be used. Money doesn't talk, it waits. These men had been waiting since the ambulance, and now they had put the pen on the table. He did not touch the pen. He looked at the document for a long moment. Then he looked up at the three of them, at the architecture of what they had built in the 6 weeks of his supposed diminishment, at the relationships and side conversations and parallel structures they had been constructing while he sat at the window and let them believe the view was all he had left. "How long has this document existed?" he said. Ryu did not hesitate. 2 weeks. And before the document, the conversations that produced it, how long? A shorter silence, more loaded. "The organization required contingency planning," Ryu said. "The organization required contingency planning before I was shot," Mun-hee said. "Which means these conversations began before the convoy, which means the planning was not contingent on my condition. My condition was contingent on the planning." The room went very still. Sung-jin moved first, a small, involuntary shift in his chair that communicated more than any prepared statement could. The movement of a man whose calculation has just failed and whose body knows it before his mind has finished processing. Quack looked at the document, at the unsigned signature line, with the expression of a man watching a bridge he is standing on begin to demonstrate structural problems. Only Ryu remained entirely composed, which told its own story, the composure of a man who had prepared for multiple outcomes. "I want to be clear about what I'm hearing," Ryu said. His voice had shed its concern performance. The underlying architecture of the man was visible now. Not hostile, Ryu was never hostile where calculation sufficed. Simply direct. "You're suggesting that the three of us had prior knowledge of the convoy." "I'm not suggesting anything," Mun-hee said. "I'm observing that a succession document existed 2 weeks after I returned home, which required preparation time, which places its origin in the period of the assassination attempt itself. I'm observing that the three of you arrived together for a meeting listed as bilateral, and I'm observing that a pen was placed on my desk." He looked at the pen. "No one touches the pen," he said. "The meeting is concluded." They left in the same formation they had arrived in. The door closed. He sat in the study alone with the document still on the desk and the pen beside it and the city outside making its ordinary, indifferent demands on the afternoon. He did not move for a long time. Beak Ryu, across 12 years, had been the fixed point. The person in the organization whose loyalty had functioned as a structural given, not tested, because testing had felt like an insult to something he had believed was solid. He had believed it was solid because he had needed it to be solid. Because a man who trusts no one eventually has nothing, no organization, no leverage, no functioning architecture of relationships. He had extended Ryu a degree of trust that he had extended to very few people, and called it professional assessment rather than what it actually was. What it actually was, he understood now, was hope. He had hoped Ryu was what he presented himself as. I was the king of the city, and the men I'd built the city with had been measuring the throne while I still occupied it. His phone lit up at 2:15. His head of security. A message, not a call, the channel used for information that should not exist as audio. The private number, traced, registered to a holding company, second layer peeled. Director, a former associate of Kwak Du-hyun. Account activity includes 3 transfers to the logistics coordinator. 2 of the transfers predate the convoy by 6 weeks. 1 post-dates it by 4 days. He read it twice. Kwak. The financial architect had not merely joined a succession document, he had funded the infrastructure of the ambush, which meant he had known before the convoy, which meant the document Ryu had presented was not opportunism capitalizing on an existing injury. It was the second phase of a sequence Kwak had partially financed and Ryu had agreed to benefit from. The shape of it was complete now. He had the full map. Phoebe, with her lawyers and her valuation firms and her modified medication. Kwak, with his offshore account and his forensically prepared restructured document. Ryu, with his 12 years of performed loyalty and his careful, patient geometry. Sungjin, the least architecturally significant, a man who had climbed onto a moving structure because the structure appeared to be heading somewhere, and he had decided his interests lay in that direction. 4 people. Different entry points, different stakes, one shared conclusion about what should happen to Sun Mun-hee. He placed the document in the locked drawer with the toxicology report. Then he called a number he had not used in 18 months. A man outside the organization's structure, adjacent to it, historically, in the way that certain people are adjacent to power without being subject to its internal politics. A man who owed him a debt of the kind that did not depreciate. I need a room, Mun-hee said. Neutral ground. 1 week from today. The kind of room where what is said in it is final. The man on the other end understood what final meant. I'll arrange it, he said. Vanessa was in the corridor when he came out of the study at 4. Moving in the direction of the linen room, unhurried, the household continuing its ordinary rhythms around the extraordinary things occurring inside them. She stopped when she saw his face. Said nothing. Read it. 3 of them, he said quietly, and Phoebe. Her expression held the particular quality he had come to rely on, not performing shock, not requiring him to elaborate, simply receiving the information with the gravity it warranted. What happens now? She said. He looked at her. Now, he said, I stand up. Not metaphorically. He meant it in both senses simultaneously, and she understood both, and the understanding moved through her expression like the resolution of a cord that had been suspended too long. When? She said. 1 week, he said, but not yet. They need to believe for 7 more days that the chair is permanent and the signature is coming. He held her gaze. Which means nothing in this house changes. She understood the full scope of what he was asking. 7 more days of performance from both of them. 7 more days of the wheelchair, the deference, the household operating as though the man at its center was diminishing rather than preparing. Nothing changes, she confirmed. I let them think I was dying so they would show me their daggers. Every one of them obliged. And now I had the map and the room and 7 days to let them believe they had won. They hadn't won anything. They had simply finished arming me. The room was on the 41st floor of a building. that did not appear in any registry connected to the Heon syndicate. That was the point. Neutral ground in his world did not mean equal ground. It meant ground with no prior allegiance, a space that owed nothing to either side of the table and would therefore read whatever happened inside it with the impartiality of stone. The man who had arranged it had done so with the efficiency of someone who understood that the request carried weight and that the weight required discretion. No staff, no recording infrastructure. The kind of room where what was said became immediately, irrevocably real the moment it left a person's mouth. He had arrived 40 minutes early. Not in the chair. He had walked from the private elevator to the head of the table and stood there in the particular silence of a man reacquainting himself with his own height, his own reach, the specific perspective of a person who is vertical. And then he had sat down in a chair that was simply a chair and waited. They came in the order he had anticipated. Quack first, because Quack was always early, the discipline of a financial mind that treated punctuality as a form of leverage. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Mun-hee standing to receive him, and the stop was involuntary, the body registering something the mind had not yet processed. "Mr. Quack," Mun-hee said pleasantly. Quack entered, sat, said nothing, which was itself a statement, the silence of a man rapidly revising a situation he had been confident about 20 minutes ago. Sung-jin arrived 4 minutes later and made the same stop at the doorway, less composed in his recovery. His eyes moved from Mun-hee to Quack and back, running the calculation, arriving at an answer he did not have a prepared response for. Ryu came last, on time precisely. He crossed the threshold without stopping, which told Mun-hee something about the quality of Ryu's discipline. Even confronted with evidence that the landscape had shifted, he absorbed it mid-stride rather than breaking. He sat to Mun-hee's left, at the position of the second in command, which had been his position for 12 years, and which he occupied now with the specific composure of a man who has decided that composure is the only remaining asset worth protecting. Phoebe came in 30 seconds behind Ryu. She had been told this was an organizational review meeting. She had been told her presence was requested as a stakeholder, a word chosen carefully, because it was accurate and because it would not prepare her for what it actually meant in this context. She saw him standing. She stood very still in the doorway for a full 3 seconds, longer than Quack, longer than Sung-jin. The duration of someone whose entire architecture of the past months was being revised in real time and finding that the revision had no solid ground to land on. She sat at the far end of the table. He watched her arrange her expression. The speed and precision of it, the way she moved through alarm and arrived at composure in under 5 seconds. He had once found this skill remarkable. He now understood it for what it was, the practiced mechanism of a person for whom every emotion was a performance, and the performance was always in service of a goal. The reveal that would end dynasties. They walked into the room thinking they were attending a meeting. They were attending a reckoning. He did not begin with evidence. This was deliberate. A man who opens with evidence is still making an argument, still in the position of someone who needs to convince. He was not here to convince anyone of anything. The convincing was finished. What remained was severance. "I want to describe something," he said. His voice had the quality of a room with good acoustics, clear, without effort, filling the space without force. "I want to describe the past 8 weeks from the beginning, and I want each of you to listen to your own part in it, not to respond, simply to hear it from the outside the way I've been hearing it." No one spoke. 8 weeks ago, he said, I was shot on a private road outside Seoul. The convoy was ambushed using route information that could only have come from within the organization's scheduling infrastructure. The logistics coordinator responsible has been identified, his funding traced, and the origin of that funding documented. He looked at Quack. The account is registered through 2 shells to a holding company whose director is a former associate of yours. 3 transfers, 2 before the ambush and 1 4 days after. Quack's face did not move. The face of a man who had prepared for the possibility of this conversation and had decided in advance that denial was not his position. Something colder than that. The calculation of a man determining, in real time, what his options were from here. While I recovered, Munhee continued, a succession document was prepared, 14 pages, distributed authority model, signature line at the bottom with a pen placed conveniently beside it. He looked at Ryu. 2 weeks in my home, which means its preparation began during the ambush window itself. Ryu held his gaze, the composure of a man who had decided to see this through to its conclusion before deciding his response to it. The document was designed to sound temporary, Munhee said. It was not temporary. The authority thresholds were structured to require explicit reversal rather than natural expiry, which means the intent was permanence with the appearance of contingency. That's sophisticated work. It required someone who understands how organizational documents function well enough to build irreversibility into apparently reversible language. He looked at Quack again. Quack looked back. They say money talks. His had been talking for months, and I had finally learned to read the language. The Inchin contract, Munhee said to Sungjin. 15% reduction, unnecessary, presented as urgency. You were either naive enough to be used or willing enough to be useful. I haven't decided which, and the distinction matters for what happens next. Sungjin looked at the table. The posture of a man who has identified the correct response to a situation he cannot escape and is executing it. Stillness, minimal exposure, waiting to understand what the available outcomes are before committing to a position. Then he turned to the far end of the table. Phoebe had maintained her composure through the first 3 minutes with the discipline of someone who has survived difficult rooms before and understands that the surface is the only asset available when everything else has been removed. She sat with her hands flat on the table. He noted this, because her hands always moved when she was managing anxiety, and her expression had the quality of a woman listening to a case being made against someone else, because that was the version of this meeting she was trying to inhabit for as long as it remained available to her. 7 months ago, he said, and her eyes moved to him, you engaged a law firm outside my household's counsel. The engagement predates my injury by 7 months, which means it predates the convoy by 6. 3 properties were submitted for independent valuation. The Mapo property, the Gangnam title, and the penthouse. He paused. The valuation firm was selected for its independence from any monitoring provisions connected to the organization. The intent was a paper trail that would read, in any future legal review, as pre-existing estate planning. Phoebe said nothing. 4 months ago, an offshore account connected to the convoy's logistics funding was opened. The account traces, at 2 removes, to an apartment in Apgujeong. He looked at her directly. An apartment I paid for. An apartment you occupied for 11 months before moving here. The room had achieved a complete stillness. You didn't capitalize on an existing plan, he said. You initiated it. The convoy was your infrastructure. The succession document was built on the assumption that the convoy would succeed, and when it didn't succeed completely, the medication was the correction. He reached into the folder on the table beside him and slid the toxicology report to the center of the table. 4 pages, clinical language. The compound identified, its interaction with his existing medications described, its effect, the acceleration of documented decline toward a plausible conclusion, laid out with the flat, irrefutable authority of laboratory science. He watched her look at it. She looked at it for a long time. When she looked up, something had changed in her expression. Not collapse, she was not a woman who collapsed, but the architecture of the performance had come down. What was underneath it was not guilt exactly, and not fear exactly. It was the specific, exhausted expression of a person who has been running a very long calculation and has finally arrived at a sum they cannot dispute. The compound was delivered by hand, he said, on a morning tray, with a story about a doctor who had not made a call. Silence. She had ordered the flowers before the body was cold. The body wasn't cold. And now she was sitting at the far end of a table understanding what it meant to have miscalculated the body. He opened the second folder. This one contained documents that were not forensic. They were structural. prepared by his legal team across the past 5 days, the team that operated outside every channel in this room, the team that had been working while he sat in the chair, and the chair sat in the study, and the study sat in a penthouse that everyone in this room had decided was a staging area for his removal. "Quack," he said. "Your position in the organization is terminated effective today. The evidence regarding your funding of the convoy logistics has been packaged and is held in 3 separate locations by 3 separate people whose instructions are to act on it independently if anything happens to me or to anyone connected to my household." He paused. "You will not contest the termination. You will not contact any current member of the organization. You will leave this room, and this city and the departure will be permanent." Quack looked at the document slid in front of him, looked at the signature line, picked up the pen. Signed. "Sung-jin," Mun-hee said, "you are naive enough to be managed and not quite willing enough to be irredeemable. Your role is restructured, reduced. You will report through a new chain that does not include Ryu. You will understand that the next deviation, the next decision made on the assumption that my attention is elsewhere, ends the same way this one did, with less mercy." Sung-jin nodded, the nod of a man who has received a verdict and is grateful it wasn't the other one. Then Ryu. He looked at his oldest lieutenant for a long moment. 12 years. The weight of it was real. He did not pretend otherwise, not to himself, not in this room. The specific quality of a betrayal that costs something is its honesty about what you had actually trusted. He had trusted Ryu with more than professional loyalty, and Ryu had treated that trust as the most exploitable asset available. "You knew about the convoy," Mun-hee said. Ryu held his eyes. "I knew it was being planned." The admission, clean, delivered without deflection. The last performance of a man who has decided that dignity in defeat is the only remaining currency. "You didn't stop it." "No," Ryu said. "You waited to see if it would succeed." A pause. "Yes." 12 years, compressed into 3 syllables. "The document," Mun-hee said. "Sign it." Ryu looked at the termination paperwork, at the evidence packet summary clipped to the front, at 12 years of accumulated trust reduced to a signature line. He signed. Stood. Looked at Mun-hee one final time with the expression of a man who has something to say, and has decided that saying it is beneath what remains of his integrity. He left without speaking. Only Phoebe remained. He looked at her across the length of the table. She looked back with the exhausted composure of someone who has used everything available and found it insufficient. "The properties," he said. "The valuation documentation, the law firm engagement, the succession architecture, all of it is in the packet. Your name appears on enough of it that a legal challenge to the asset structure would be protracted, and for you, inadvisable." She said nothing. "The apartment in Apgujeong," he said. "It's yours. It was always yours in the sense that I paid for it, and what I pay for I can transfer. The title will be in your name by Monday. That is the sum of what leaves this room with you." She looked at the transfer document. He slid toward her. For a moment he thought she would say something. The look of a woman with a prepared response, something sharp, something designed to leave a mark. The last weapon of a person who has lost everything else. She picked up the pen. Signed. Stood. She left without looking back, which was, he noted, the only authentic thing he had seen from her in months. Not performance, not management, just a woman walking out of a room she had lost. The door closed. The reveal that would end dynasties. 4 people came into that room carrying knives. They left carrying documents. The difference between a knife and a document is that a document lasts. He sat alone at the head of the table, in the silence that follows things that cannot be undone. And he did something he had not done since he was 19 years old in a cold apartment in Mapo, certain he was building something that would last. He allowed himself to feel the full, clean weight of it. Not victory, something quieter. Survival, chosen consciously on his own terms with his eyes open. He stood up on a Sunday. Not at the summit, Not in front of the men whose faces had shown him exactly what they were when they believed no one capable of consequences was watching. He had been standing, privately, for weeks, the 30-second window at the study window, the controlled tests of what his body could sustain, the careful architecture of a recovery he had managed in complete isolation from everyone who might use the information. The Sunday morning stood up with him. He stood in the study and looked at the city below, the full panorama of it, souls spreading outward in every direction, indifferent and enormous and completely unchanged by everything that had occurred inside this building over the past weeks. Cities did not adjust themselves to the interior dramas of the people occupying them. They simply continued. He had always found this clarifying. The chair was still behind him. He did not fold it, did not move it. Let it remain where it was as a fact of the room rather than a requirement of his condition. There was a difference between the two that he had not fully understood until this moment. He found her in the kitchen. She was doing what she did on Sunday mornings, the household inventory, the week's planning, the quiet administrative work that kept the building functional and that she had continued without interruption or diminishment through everything that had occurred in the weeks around it. She looked up when he came through the doorway. On foot. He watched her face process it, not with shock, because she had known, but with the specific quality of seeing a thing you have known abstractly become physically present. He was standing in her kitchen doorway, full height, the tattoos on his neck visible above his collar in a way the chair's angle had always slightly concealed. The full geometry of the man rather than the managed, seated version. She set down her pen. Said nothing. He crossed the kitchen, walked, deliberately, the simple, unremarkable act of walking across a room, and sat down at the table across from her. The same table they had sat at a week ago in the dark. The same 2 chairs. "It's done," he said. She looked at him. Read the full scope of what done meant across his face, which he allowed, which was itself a thing he would not have allowed 6 weeks ago. "All of them," she said. "All of them." She absorbed this. The careful, systematic way she absorbed information, building the model, checking it, accepting it. "And you," she said. "Are you," she stopped, selected more precise words. "What happens to you now?" The question was not about the organization, not about the territory or the restructure or the mechanisms of resumed authority that his legal team had spent the past week preparing. She was asking about him. The specific person sitting across from her kitchen table on a Sunday morning, who had spent 2 months in a wheelchair that was both a lie and a mirror, and had emerged from it with a clearer picture of his world than 20 years of running it had produced. He thought about the question seriously. "The organization continues," he said, "with a different structure, tighter. The lieutenants who remained clean, there were 3 take expanded roles. The gaps get filled from within carefully over time." A pause. "Quack's financial architecture is being unwound. It will take months. Sungjin's cooperation accelerates it." "That's the organization," Vanessa said. "Yes," he said. "I asked about you." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had brought him food from a market at 6 in the morning, who had held his secret for 25 days without price, who had stood in a kitchen at midnight and given him back something he had stopped believing he possessed. He did not have a prepared answer. He had spent his adult life in rooms where preparation was the difference between walking out and not walking out, and he sat at this table with nothing prepared because there was no strategic position available and he had stopped wanting one. "I don't know," he said. The first honest answer to a personal question he had given anyone in longer than he could accurately measure. She accepted this, did not rush past it or fill it with something more comfortable. "Your brother's debt," he said. "It's been cleared, the account is closed, the crew holding it has been redirected." A pause. "He's safe." She looked at him for a long moment. The expression of a person receiving something they had not asked for and do not know how to categorize. "Why?" she said. "Because someone should," he said. Her own words returned. Something happened in her expression that she did not fully manage, a brief, unguarded quality the momentary absence of the composed professional surface. Not sentiment in the performed sense. Something genuine, which was the only kind of thing that had ever meant anything to him. Love isn't what you take. It's what you choose to keep when the empire is gone. I had spent 20 years taking. I was learning slowly in a kitchen on a Sunday morning what choosing felt like. He did not ask her to stay. Not that morning. The man he was still becoming, which was different from the man he had been, understood that the things worth keeping could not be negotiated into position. They either were or they were not. He had spent a career engineering outcomes, and he was not going to engineer this one. He simply sat at the table with her in the Sunday morning light and drank the tea she made, without being asked, and looked at the city through the kitchen window and said nothing for a while. She did not fill the silence. She never filled silences unnecessarily. It was one of the first things he had noticed about her in the early days when he was cataloging everything, and it was still true, and it was still. He acknowledged this without ceremony. One of the things he valued most about being in her presence. The empire was intact. The traitors were accounted for. The chair was in the corner of the study, folded, serving no further purpose. And he was sitting in a kitchen on a Sunday morning with a woman who had chosen, repeatedly, the harder and more honest thing, in a house full of people performing easier versions of themselves, and the choosing had cost her something each time, and she had chosen anyway. He looked at her. She looked back. "What does Sunday look like," he said, "when the house doesn't need managing?" She considered this with the seriousness she brought to genuine questions. "I don't know," she said. "I've been managing it since I arrived." "Then we find out," he said. Outside, Seoul continued its enormous, indifferent morning. The city that had never adjusted itself to his interior dramas. Inside, something small and structural, and entirely without precedent in the architecture of Sun Munhee's life, quietly took up residence. Not loudly. Not with ceremony. The way honest things arrive, simply, and without asking permission, and with every intention of staying. Love isn't what you take. It's what you choose to keep when the empire is gone. I had burned down everything that was built on ash. What remained was real. And for the first time in 20 years, real was enough.